What would you do if one phone call revealed that the house your grandmother left you had already been sold without your knowledge? That was exactly what happened to me. My own cousins forged my signature, stole my inheritance, and believed they had erased every trace of the truth. But they forgot one thing. My grandmother had spent years preparing for their betrayal. What began as a stolen house uncovered a decades-old conspiracy, hidden evidence, secret recordings, and a family secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By the end of this story, someone would lose everything. Long-buried lies would finally come to light, and one shocking discovery beneath an old family chapel would change everything forever. Stay with me until the very end, because every clue matters, and the final truth is something no one saw coming. I was 34 years old when I learned that the house my grandmother left to me no longer belonged to me. The news arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Rain tapped softly against my office window. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. My phone vibrated across the desk. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I answered without much thought. A calm male voice introduced himself as a moving company supervisor. He politely asked what time I wanted my remaining belongings delivered. I froze. My fingers tightened around the phone. The warmth of the coffee cup vanished from my hand. I quietly asked him what he was talking about. He sounded confused. He explained that the new owners had hired his crew to clear out everything left inside the property. He even thanked me for labeling several storage boxes years ago because it made the job easier. Every sound around me disappeared. The office lights suddenly felt too bright. The air conditioner hummed louder than ever. My heartbeat echoed inside my ears. I slowly asked for the address. He repeated my grandmother's address, the same white farmhouse surrounded by maple trees. The same place where every summer smelled like fresh bread and blooming roses. The same porch where my grandfather taught me how to carve tiny wooden birds. The same attic where my grandmother hid birthday presents every year. The house she promised would always belong to me. I whispered that there had to be some mistake. The supervisor apologized. He said the closing had already happened 2 days earlier. The buyers already had the keys. I ended the call. My hands trembled so violently that my coffee spilled across my desk. I stared at the dark stains spreading through important documents. I barely noticed. Only one question repeated inside my mind. Who sold my house? I opened my laptop. My password felt strangely difficult to remember. My fingers refused to cooperate. Finally, I logged into the county property records. The ownership had changed. The document was real. The transfer had been officially recorded. My name appeared nowhere. Instead, I saw 3 familiar names: my cousins Daniel, Rachel, Stephen. My stomach twisted painfully. Those 3 had grown up visiting that farmhouse with me. We chased butterflies across the same fields. We climbed the same apple trees. We buried time capsules beside the old oak. After Grandma passed away, they hugged me at the funeral. They cried beside me. They promised we would always protect her memory. Now, their names appeared on legal paperwork connected to my house. I searched for more records. There it was, a deed, signed, not by me, not by my attorney. Someone had signed my name. The signature looked almost perfect. Almost. My grandmother always told me that forged signatures never copied hesitation. Mine always curved slightly before the final letter. The forged version ended with unnatural confidence. I knew immediately. Someone had practiced. Someone had spent hours studying my handwriting. Cold sweat formed across my neck. The office suddenly felt too small. I grabbed my car keys. The drive to the farmhouse normally took 2 hours. That morning, every mile felt endless. Dark clouds covered the highway. Wind shook the trees beside the road. The radio remained silent. I wanted silence. I needed to think. Every memory became another knife. Grandma baking cinnamon rolls before sunrise. Grandpa repairing the old red tractor. Christmas mornings beside the stone fireplace, every birthday, every laugh, every goodbye. The farmhouse was never just land. It was my entire childhood. I finally turned onto the gravel road. My tires crunched across familiar stones. Dust drifted behind my car. The mailbox stood freshly painted. It used to be faded blue. Now it was glossy black. Someone had planted expensive flowers beside the entrance. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway. A large moving truck stood near the garage. Workers carried antique furniture through the front door. One worker smiled politely at me. He assumed I was another visitor. I stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards still creaked beneath my feet. That sound alone nearly broke my heart. I reached for the front door. It was locked. A stranger opened it from inside. He looked about 50 years old. Friendly eyes, neatly pressed shirt. He smiled. He welcomed me as if I belonged there. Then he asked if I was looking for the previous owners. The word struck harder than any punch. Previous owners. I quietly answered that I was the owner. His smile slowly faded. Confusion replaced warmth. He invited me inside. The scent hit me immediately. Fresh paint. Industrial cleaning chemicals. The familiar smell of old cedar had vanished. The walls were bright white. Grandma loved warm cream colors. Her handmade quilts had disappeared. Grandpa's rocking chair was gone. The grandfather clock beside the staircase no longer existed. Even the family photographs had vanished. The stranger introduced himself as Michael. He explained that he and his wife purchased the property through a real estate company. Everything appeared completely legal. He proudly showed me copies of the closing documents. My heartbeat slowed. Not from relief, from horror. There it was again. My forged signature. Every page carried it. Every notarized form, every authorization, every legal acknowledgement. Someone had built an entire lie around my identity. Michael apologized repeatedly. He genuinely believed he had purchased the house honestly. I believed him. He looked as shocked as I was. Then he quietly mentioned something that changed everything. He said my cousins insisted the sale happen unusually fast. They refused multiple higher offers. They accepted less money if the buyers agreed to close immediately. My skin crawled. Why would anyone rush that much? Unless they feared I would discover everything first. Michael handed me one final document. It was an email, printed for his records. The sender was Rachel. She wrote that I lived overseas permanently. She claimed I wanted nothing to do with the property. She explained that she handled all communication for me because I rarely checked email. I never lived overseas. Not for one day. Michael noticed my expression. He quietly asked one question. Have you spoken with your cousins today? I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 messages from Stephen, 1 voicemail from Rachel. None of them mentioned the house. Every message casually asked how work was going. My blood ran cold. They already knew. They wanted to make sure I suspected nothing until everything became irreversible. I walked outside. The afternoon wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Birds sang from the maple trees. The peaceful sounds felt almost cruel. I called Rachel first. She answered cheerfully. She laughed before saying hello. The moment I asked about Grandma's house, her laughter disappeared. Silence filled the call. Then she calmly said something I will never forget. You were never supposed to find out this soon. Every muscle in my body locked. I asked what she meant. Her breathing grew heavier. She admitted they sold the house. She claimed they deserved the money because they spent years helping Grandma while I focused on my career. I reminded her that I paid every medical bill during Grandma's final illness. I reminded her that Grandma personally signed her will in front of witnesses. Rachel replied with chilling calmness. A will only matters if nobody changes the paperwork afterward. The call ended. I stood motionless beneath the old oak tree, the same tree where 4 children once buried a tiny metal box filled with promises of lifelong loyalty. Now those promises felt like rotten leaves beneath my feet. I walked toward the oak. The earth looked recently disturbed. Fresh shovel marks surrounded the trunk. Someone else had been digging there. I knelt down. The soil was still loose. My hands pushed aside damp dirt. Within minutes, my fingers struck cold metal. The time capsule was still there. The lid felt heavier than I remembered. Mud covered every side. One corner had fresh scratches. Someone had opened it before, very recently. I carefully lifted the lid. Most of our childhood photographs remained inside. Small toys, handwritten letters, old coins. Everything looked ordinary. Until I reached the bottom. Folded beneath the letters rested a sealed brown envelope. My name was written across the front, in my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I broke the brittle wax seal. The envelope released the faint scent of lavender, the same perfume my grandmother wore every Sunday. Inside rested several folded pages. A small brass key slipped into my palm. It landed with a soft metallic click. I recognized it instantly. It was the tiny key Grandma always wore on a silver chain around her neck. She never allowed anyone to touch it. Even as children, she smiled and said it protected the truth. Beneath the key rested a handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly. The handwriting remained steady. Every letter carried Grandma's unmistakable elegance. I unfolded the first page. The paper crackled softly. The afternoon breeze tried to steal it from my hands. I held it tighter. The letter began. My dear grandchild, if you are reading this, someone has betrayed our family. A chill raced through my body. The wind suddenly felt much colder. My eyes rushed across the page. Grandma explained that she never trusted everyone equally. She had noticed greed growing inside certain relatives, long before she became ill. She wrote that money changes people faster than time ever could. She expected someone would eventually challenge her final wishes. She refused to leave my future unprotected. She described a hidden collection of documents. Original deeds, financial records, private journals, audio recordings, every conversation she secretly recorded after discovering relatives discussing ways to take control of the property. My pulse pounded. Grandma had known. She had prepared for this. She explained that the brass key opened an old safety deposit box, not at the local bank everyone knew, at a small private bank nearly 50 miles away. Only 2 names were authorized to access it. Hers and mine, nobody else. Not even through power of attorney, not even through inheritance. I looked down at the tiny brass key again. It suddenly felt far heavier than metal should. I continued reading. The final page contained one sentence written in darker ink. If this letter reaches you, trust nobody until you hear my final recording. A second folded sheet slipped from the envelope. It contained a bank name, a box number, a 6-digit combination, and one final instruction. Open the box before speaking to the police. My breathing became uneven. Grandma always chose her words carefully. If she wanted me to wait before contacting authorities, she had a reason. I carefully returned every page to the envelope. The brass key disappeared into my jacket pocket. As I stood up, movement caught the corner of my eye. Someone was watching me. Across the road, half hidden behind a black pickup truck, Daniel. He stood perfectly still. His face showed no surprise. Only anger. His eyes dropped toward the envelope in my hands. Then he slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He made one quick call. He never looked away from me. 30 seconds later, another black SUV turned onto the gravel road. Then another. Neither vehicle belonged to the new owners. Both stopped near the entrance. 4 unfamiliar men stepped out. None of them smiled. One of them pointed directly at the envelope in my hand. Daniel quietly said only 5 words. He found Grandma's insurance plan. Every one of them started walking toward me. I backed away without taking my eyes off them. The envelope remained clutched against my chest. The wind whipped through the maple trees. Dry leaves spiraled across the gravel. The four men spread out. Each one silently blocked a different direction. Daniel stayed behind them. His expression carried none of the warmth of family. Only calculation. Rachel stepped out of the first SUV. Her designer coat fluttered in the breeze. She folded her arms. Stephen emerged from the second vehicle. His jaw remained clenched. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked how I was. Rachel spoke first. "Give us the envelope." Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. I shook my head. She sighed heavily. "You have no idea what is inside," I answered quietly. "Neither do you." A flicker of panic crossed her face. It disappeared almost instantly. Daniel stepped forward. "You always had to make everything difficult." I laughed once. It sounded hollow. "You forged my signature. You stole my house. You lied to innocent buyers. And now you are telling me that I am the difficult one." None of them denied it. That silence answered every accusation. One of the strangers cracked his knuckles. Another glanced toward the empty road. Daniel noticed. He smiled. "There is nobody coming. No neighbors. No police. Nobody will interrupt this conversation." The air suddenly felt heavy. I slipped one hand into my jacket pocket. My fingers wrapped around my phone. Without looking down, I pressed the side button 3 times. The emergency recording shortcut activated. The microphone quietly began recording every word. The phone remained hidden. Daniel never noticed. Rachel took another step closer. "Grandma planned for everything, but she never planned for us finding the letter first." My stomach tightened. "You already knew about it." Stephen nodded. "We searched the house, the attic, the basement, the fireplace, the walls. We even removed floorboards. We never found the envelope." Daniel looked toward the old oak tree. "We forgot the time capsule." His voice carried genuine frustration. Rachel glared at me. "You ruined months of planning." I looked at the freshly disturbed soil. "You dug here before," Stephen answered without thinking. 3 nights ago." Rachel shot him an angry look. He immediately realized his mistake. Daniel ignored him. He focused entirely on me. "What else did Grandma write?" I remained silent. "What is inside the bank box?" Still, I said nothing. Daniel's patience began to disappear. He reached into his jacket. He slowly pulled out a pistol. He held it low by his side. From anyone passing on the road, my pulse hammered against my ribs. The birds stopped singing, even the wind seemed to disappear. Daniel spoke almost gently. "This has gone far enough. Give me the envelope. I promise nobody gets hurt." I stared directly into his eyes. "I have heard promises from you before. They always end with someone losing everything." His face hardened. One of the strangers took another step toward me. Then another. Gravel crunched beneath heavy boots. I continued backing away. My heel struck something solid, the old stone well. It had been abandoned for decades. Grandpa covered it with thick wooden planks when I was a child. One loose plank shifted beneath my foot. A deep, hollow echo rose from below. Daniel smiled. "You have nowhere left to go." I glanced behind me. The weathered wooden cover looked old, rotting, barely holding together. One wrong step would send me straight into the darkness beneath. Daniel lifted the pistol slightly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Last chance." At that exact moment, the moving company supervisor ran out of the farmhouse. His face was pale. He shouted with everything he had. "Stop! Police are on the way." Every head turned toward him. Daniel reacted first. He swung the pistol toward the supervisors. The sound of the gunshot shattered the quiet afternoon. Birds exploded from the trees. The supervisor threw himself behind a parked truck. Workers screamed. Boxes crashed onto the driveway. Chaos erupted in every direction. The 4 strangers rushed toward me. I turned and jumped across the old well cover. The rotten boards cracked beneath my feet. Wood splintered loudly. One of the men chased after me. His next step landed directly on the broken planks. The wood gave way instantly. His scream echoed through the countryside. His arms flailed wildly before he disappeared into the darkness below. The impact from inside the well shook the ground. Everyone froze for one horrifying second. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, the unmistakable sound of multiple police sirens began growing louder. The sirens grew louder with every passing second. Blue and red lights flashed between the trees. Daniel's confidence vanished. His eyes widened. He pointed toward the road. "Move." The remaining strangers reacted instantly. Two rushed toward their vehicles. One sprinted toward the woods. The fourth leaned over the broken well. His partners screamed from the darkness below. The echo carried through the valley. Rachel grabbed Daniel's arm. "We have to leave." Daniel jerked his arm away. "Not without the envelope." He charged straight at me. His shoes scattered gravel with every step. I turned and ran toward the farmhouse. The moving crew pulled workers behind trucks for cover. Michael shouted for everyone to stay down. Another gunshot rang out. The bullet shattered the porch railing beside me. Splinters exploded into the air. The sharp smell of fresh pine filled my nose. I reached the front steps. A worker pulled me behind a large oak cabinet waiting to be loaded. My breathing came in ragged bursts. Daniel searched frantically. He had lost sight of me. Police cruisers burst onto the property. Their tires sprayed gravel across the driveway. Deputies stepped out with weapons drawn. "Loose the weapon." Nobody moved. The command echoed across the property. Daniel hesitated. His eyes darted toward the woods, toward the SUVs, toward me. He knew every choice ended badly. One of the strangers panicked. He fired a wild shot into the air. The deputies reacted immediately. Within seconds, he was face down on the gravel. The second stranger surrendered. The third disappeared into the trees. Rachel dropped to her knees. Her hands shook violently. Stephen slowly raised both hands. Daniel remained standing. His pistol still hung at his side. A deputy repeated the command. "Drop it now." For several endless seconds, nobody breathed. Then Daniel slowly released the pistol. It struck the gravel with a dull metallic sound. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The tension broke all at once. Workers emerged from hiding. The man trapped inside the well continued shouting for help. Emergency responders rushed toward him. An ambulance arrived moments later. A deputy approached me. His eyes fell on the envelope in my hands. He quietly asked if I was the property owner. I nodded. He asked what happened. I handed him my phone. "The entire conversation is recorded." His eyebrows lifted. He played the recording through an earpiece. As the minutes passed, his expression changed completely. He called another detective over, then another. Soon 3 investigators listened together. Rachel noticed. Her face drained of color. Daniel finally understood what I had done. He stared at me in complete disbelief. "You recorded everything."